All right, well, hello everyone, and welcome to Mary Plumb's webinar on Prince, A Life in Music. So really excited to have this webinar. We don't get to do full chart interpretation kind of webinars very often, so and we get requests for them all the time. So really excited to have Mary doing this chart with us today. So Mary is joining us from Ashland, Oregon, where she's the president of the NCGR chapter there in Ashland, where they have events. And she's also a longtime contributor to TMA as the book reviewer. She works on their blog and the web editor. She also wrote the really popular beginner series that they have on the site. So you may know her from there as well. So a wealth of knowledge and info for you here, I'm sure. That is what she has prepared for us today. So with that, I will turn it over to Mary and we'll get things started.
Thank you, Tony.
Of course.
Hi. Okay, so everyone can hear me. Thank you. Good morning to everybody, or depending on your time zone. Before I start, I had two personal points I wanted to just mention to orient myself. The first is that here in Southern Oregon, we have very, very smoky air and have had that for a number of weeks. So I'll be drinking a lot of water and probably have some soothing implements for my throat, but I wanted to just let you know that my voice may not be quite as clear as sometimes. And the other thing, just for my sort of personal comfort, when I concentrate a lot, focusing my mind, sometimes I close my eyes quite a bit. And I think you guys will be able to see me. I just wanted you to know if I'm closing my eyes, you're not losing me. I'm not leaving you. I'm just using that as a strategy to help me again stay focused. Okay?
Sounds good to me, Mary.
Alrighty then.
Catherine says you're in the zone.
Thank you. Okay.
Cool. So Mary's just getting her PowerPoint going here for us, our presentation.
And then is that up there now, Tony, for all to see?
Nope, not yet. So just hit that share screen button over on the Zoom.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Share screen, right. There we go.
There we go. Awesome. And then you can just click that. Yeah, you got it. Full screen.
Okay.
Looks great.
Good. Okay, thank you. So first of all, I would like to set the stage for this presentation, my sort of orientation into this particular piece of work or astrological work. And that is that last year when Prince died, when Prince passed away, I was very moved and rather surprisingly moved, not having been a fan or really knowing anything about him. But I listened to all kinds of music and always have, but again, he wasn't somebody I was attuned to. But again, when he passed away, the outpouring of grief and emotion globally, not just musicians, but commentators from many walks of life, that was very intriguing to me or moving to me, along with a certain sort of symbolic moment that I had regarding his horoscope, which maybe I'll talk about at the end. But again, this sense that I was personally so drawn into his passing. And also I was very intrigued by the purple. Why are they all wearing purple? I didn't have any idea what that was. So all of these things led me to a kind of compulsive or very delightful few weeks after he passed, where I listened to his music, lots of music. I watched videos, And of course, I looked at his horoscope and was captured by his chart. So I was very personally drawn into this material. And so to set the stage further, this is not a technical talk per se, nor is it a talk in which I will be teaching a particular method or demonstrating a particular philosophical approach, but rather I see this as an observational view with some key features in Prince's biography as shown through the various astrological techniques. So it is a sketch. It's a sketch or outline, if you will, of a obviously very complex human being. And in terms of the methodology that I'm going to show, the different astrological methods and techniques are also all worthy of deep investigation and study. I'm just, as I said, I feel like I'm asking you to accompany me on a walk through a beginning of an astrological understanding of Prince's life. So one more thing I'll mention, my approach, as I said in the intro material, I believe my approach in this talk in particular is rather eclectic. As I said, I'm not sticking with a particular methodology, although of course one could do that. But this particular talk is quite eclectic, which in hindsight, I kind of, understanding more about Prince, I kind of see that is a certain way, a reflection of his life as well. So, some very basics about Prince's horoscope. This is the natal chart, obviously. Oh, I thought I could point to it, but I guess I can't. But you can see that. He was born June 7th, 1958, 6:17 p.m. in Minneapolis.
Hey, Mary, we're still on the first slide.
Oh, you are?
Yep.
Huh. Well, maybe Tony, I'll have to.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Maybe.
Were you seeing the?
I was seeing it when it said play. I'll go back to play slideshow. It may be that we'll try again. And maybe that I'll have to manually bump it forward.
Try hitting your arrow key now.
Back or forward?
Either way. And do you see the next slide?
Yes.
Okay, we don't. Okay, so apparently you're gonna have to go back and forth like that. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Then it's just going to be not quite as. Now, do you see a chart?
Oh yeah, and we saw it before. I mean, if you wanted to go full screen and then back and forth, you can do that, because when you go full screen, we see that as well. We just didn't see the changes for some reason.
Well, I think if this is not too confusing,
just do it this way.
I
think that's big enough. Yeah, it looks great to me.
Okay. So again, now I can actually point as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is another useful function here.
Yep.
So just everybody focus on just this slide. So again, some keynotes of Prince's birth chart. Born with the sun in Gemini, moon in Pisces, Scorpio rising, the three primary components of the beginning to understand a chart. So a few words here. I've written keywords about Gemini: versatile, funny, intelligent. Pisces: open, sensitive, idealistic. Scorpio: seductive, private, charismatic. So those are some quick encapsulations of the primary astrological signs. I'm going to spend a little time just with some reflections from his, or descriptions from his personal biography, a little more personally about how he demonstrates each of those signs. So first of all, the sun in Gemini. We know that Gemini is an air sign, so enormous dexterity with words. Prince also he used many different names in the course of his life. He wrote under different names. He was also very interested in giving people nicknames. He wrote thousands of songs. including many hits for other artists. So the dexterity of language as well as musical dexterity. We know of Gemini connected to the hands and fingers, and Prince could play any instrument. I listened to a podcast from his sound engineer, who gave a lovely description to me that encapsulated part of Prince's gift. He said he was extremely nimble as a performer. This fellow was his live sound engineer for 28 years. He said that Prince was a master at disguising any sort of mistake, and he got everyone back on track. So this quality of quick-footedness, and he also said, the sound engineer also said that in 27 years, he never heard a bad note, never sharp or flat. Some other qualities we connect with Gemini, he was known to be unusually restless or usually restless. That is a key description of the Gemini archetype. In terms of the language and the facility with language, one of his early close collaborators said that Prince always had a tendency to speak in parables. She said he has a different language that he has learned. And another big theme here with Gemini is siblings, the twins. Prince worked with many sets of twins, including famously the set of dancers, Amaya and Mandy McLean. They were known as the twins, TWINZ. Also, there were musicians that he collaborated with extensively. Wendy and Susanna were twin sisters, one of whom was a romantic partner, important romantic partner for Prince, and the other was an important musical collaborator. Also, in his biography, Sheila E. is a renowned drummer and musician, came from the musical family. So Sheila and her brother also worked with Prince extensively. In his biography, Prince also had one full sister, and 5 or 6 half siblings. And something else that I read in testament to his artistry, to his quality after he passed, that really resonated with the Gemini archetype. The quote, "He made himself a unifier of dualities, racial, sexual, musical, cultural." So as the heart essence of Gemini, working with duality and unifier of dualities. I thought that was a particularly telling comment from someone who knew him well. Or, pardon me, that was from a description and a eulogy to him after he passed. So then, moving on, this next slide obviously is it capturing an essence to some degree of the moon in Pisces. So again, some words from people who knew him. One of his early love affairs, the woman described him as being incredibly tender. She said, which is curious when we look further at his chart, she said, "I wouldn't describe him as vulnerable," because she said he wasn't particularly vulnerable, but he was tender. She said he presented himself with much more tenderness than I think most people have ever known him to be. He was a very, very tender man. Again, I think that's a lovely description of the moon in Pisces. So the enigmatic Scorpio rising. Probably this Scorpio rising, it is on the ascendant, so the quality of Scorpio may be the most obvious thing, or most obvious quality that people associate, at least at first glance, with Prince, in that he was a very erotically driven, highly sexual being. He was always concerned in his musical life with the combination of the sexual, the religious, the connection with sexuality and religion or spirituality. This theme ran through his work, throughout his life. The integration, or the integration, yes, of the sexuality and the higher calling, or the higher spirituality, as a Scorpio motif. Another quality that he had in his personal life, which speaks to me to the Scorpio, is that a lot of his work, he recorded on his own. He sang to himself. He would have everyone go out of the recording, the engineers, recording assistants leave the room, and they say he was known to deploy his literally best work when he was alone, that he was singing to himself. So this quality of I think the privacy, the internal focus associated with the sign of Scorpio. I'm going to try, Tony, to put this in full screen for a moment.
Okay.
To see if, I think we'll spend a little time on this chart.
Just to make it a little bigger.
Yeah, let's see. How do I do that from here? Sorry, guys.
Just do the, I think you can just click that play button.
Play slideshow. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's right. Okay, thank you.
Sure thing.
So a little closer look at Prince's chart. Now, again, I just encapsulated some of the primary eye-catching themes of the sun, the moon, and the ascendant. But when, as I said, when he first passed, I was captured by his horoscope. The first thing that I noticed is Regulus, the fixed star of the royalty on the midheaven, conjunct the midheaven at 29 degrees of Leo. And I, as I said, didn't know anything about his life really. And I assumed that he, in some sort of affective way or some sort of pretentious way, took that name, called himself Prince. But in fact, he was named that by his mother and father. That was his given name, which I found particularly riveting, to have the star of Regulus, the royal lineage, exactly on his midheaven.
That's pretty great.
Yeah.
It's also nice to see Regulus in the chart of somebody that I like versus somebody else that maybe we shouldn't talk about today.
That's right. We won't divert.
Right.
I'm wondering, Tony, do you think it's better if I do it this way so I can point? It might be.
I think now that it's actually not any smaller this way. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I feel like it's good to really maybe pinpoint. So there again is Pluto at the midheaven. And again, this was, as I said, I was sort of really taken by my experience when Prince passed. And when I saw this in the chart, I became just very deeply intrigued. So some other key features in his horoscope: Mercury is in Gemini, Venus is in Taurus, and Mars is in Aries. So those three personal planets are all in their sign of rulership. They're all in the sign where they are potentially most comfortable, have greatest ease to fulfill the function of that planet. That is a really significant marker in a horoscope. It's unusual to have, obviously we're looking at an unusual, highly talented person, but it is unusual to see three personal planets in their sign of rulership. And further than that, the chart ruler, Scorpio rising. So I use Mars. I always look to Mars first. So the Scorpio rising, the Mars in Aries, 0 degrees of Aries, is the ruler of the horoscope. So the ruler of the horoscope, in a certain way, I think of it as that's the planet that really keeps the life on track. I think there's an image from the medieval texts or earlier on, that the captain of the ship of the chart. I think of the planet that rules the ascendant as the planet that's in charge of that incarnation, arriving at the far shores, arriving at the mark, the point of destiny. So the captain of the ship, the helmsman, very important planet in any horoscope. But when we understand from sort of modern astrology, not only is Mars at 0 degrees of Aries, his home sign, strongest sign, along with Scorpio, but he's also at 0 degrees of Aries. In the Uranian system in modern astrology, 0 degrees of Aries is the point of maximum fame, where energy in the chart has maximum ability to make an impact in the world, and also for the world to impact the individual. So that gives a really strong weight to, extra weight to the chart ruler. Another thing I'll just throw in here, because it was interesting to see, the asteroid Eros. The asteroid Eros is exactly parallel to this Mars. So further flavoring the chart ruler by the erotic component, shall we say, signified by Eros. I mentioned the fixed stars, I mentioned Pluto, which caught my attention right away, Regulus. And this, to me, fascination that indeed he had not chosen that name out of arrogance, but been called that from the family. So that fixed star drew me into this chart. But then there are many fixed stars that are significant in his horoscope, but I'm only going to talk about one other one now. At 22 degrees of Sag, it's called Ras al-Haq, 22 degrees of Sag, which is on his Saturn, conjunct his natal Saturn. And Ras al-Haq is connected with connected with the desire to heal a wound, So we can see Saturn is opposing the sun in the natal chart. So at a psychological level, we could talk about perhaps issues with father figure or separation from the father. I'm not going to dwell in this presentation on psychological material really at all, but it is noteworthy that Prince's father was very strict. Prince's father was a musician, and he was very, very strict with his son. In fact, he wouldn't let him play the piano. And Prince used to sneak around and play when his father was out of the house. But significantly, Prince admired his father's musicianship, and at one point was quoted as saying he wanted to be better than his father. So I think that points to, we can see the symbolism or the motivation of the father, perhaps, again, to venture into psychological interpretation for a moment, the idea of healing the split or the separation from the father, but more significantly in this case, in my view, by the fact that that fixed star is right on Saturn. And the fixed stars tend to operate, I would say, in a very deep layer of the psyche, the deeper embedded qualities that are always there, but it's a sense of the real. I think of it as the bedrock of the incarnation of the individuality. So, and then moving on to my last point here on this slide is another, to me, extremely intriguing piece of information that David Cochran, who has a wonderful series of YouTube videos, he's a programmer and a wonderful, he does what he calls vibrational astrology. I won't go into that too much except to say that David Cochran did a video and found this extraordinary high harmonics, 35th and 55th harmonics in Prince's chart. I won't report all of his work, but it's fascinating. I think David was as excited about Prince's artistry and musicianship and rarity as an artist. He's equally as excited as I am. And so to me, seeing these features in the vibrational astrology, just to briefly, the 35th harmonic is connected with musical talent. It's a combination of the 5th and the 7th harmonics. So it has to do with creativity and discipline. So exceptional, it can be, well, in this case, exceptional musical ability, musical talent, because the creative, the playfulness is disciplined. One works very hard at the practice is involved. The gift is involved in fulfilling that gift. And Prince was a phenomenally focused musician. It's also connected to a tremendous sophistication in approach. So again, I'm not a musicologist by any means, but for those who are interested in Prince's musicianship, his level of specificity of technicality, of intricacy is phenomenal. The other 55th harmonic I'll just mention, because this also was really interesting to me, that David connects in Prince's chart, particularly the 55th harmonic, with the desire to inspire, and with a certain ability a certain drive to find the real truth beyond the glamour. And he notes it, particularly in Prince's chart, because the other planet's connected, but he notes it as having to do with a spiritual sincerity, which I find really quite intriguing. And one note here, just to acknowledge Prince's musicianship. Eric Clapton once was famously asked, how does it feel to be the greatest guitar player in the world? And he said, I don't know, ask Prince. So Prince is known musically as a superior talent.
Right. And Mary, where would you recommend people look if they want to learn a little bit more about David Cochran's technique there?
Yes, he has a YouTube channel. He has hundreds of different videos, and one particular is called Prince. How to see it's just called Prince. If you
YouTube cool.
David Cochran's channel, look up Prince. Yeah. Again, and this was in the, for me, the early days of feeling so somehow deeply connected or moved and impressed by Prince's artistry. So I wanted to share that. I thought it's quite a beautiful. It has to, again, it's very intricate, very sophisticated qualities, high degree of intelligence. And I'll just note here, most people, the 35th harmonic, most people don't even have one lined up precisely, but Prince had two. So I will leave his work for people to explore on their own, but it's beautiful work. And for my purpose here is a numerical, if you will, a vibrational demonstration of Prince's profound exceptional artistic gifts and his inspirational spiritual sincerity.
Great, thank you.
So then here we go. This is again noting that Prince has Venus in Taurus, Mars in Aries, and Mercury in Gemini. As I said, all three planets beautifully placed. So then in the midpoint astrology, and this, by the way, I don't want to get too technical here, but this is on the 45-degree dial. So you won't see this if you just look at a flat chart, but it takes into account numeric relationships to what you see in the wheel. Having said that, this is a very precise midpoint in Prince's natal chart. 5 minutes of orb. Any midpoint under 1 degree is very, very strong. And I'll put a note in here, so in terms of technique, that the closer with this kind of astrology, this kind of approach, the closer the aspect, the tighter the orb, the more significant it will be in the biography or in the experience of the life. So Venus, Mars, again, a powerful, potent Venus, a powerful, potent Mars.
And Mary, would you just mind, because we haven't actually had webinars on midpoints yet at Astrology University, could you just explain for people what that means when they're seeing Venus / Mars equals Mercury.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Tony.
Sure thing.
Well, it means that in the geometry of the chart, there is a precise relationship between the Venus-Mars midpoint, that is in the horoscope, where Venus and Mars come together, which is known, the Venus-Mars midpoint is a point of passion, a point of artistic creativity and sensuality in any horoscope. So the Venus-Mars, the place, the point, the point in the horoscope where those two planets meet is Mercury has a numeric resonance exactly to that point. So perhaps if I just sort of keep this more at the playful level, that what I wrote about this, and in understanding Prince, and to me that picture really just shows this playful shape shifter, Mercury, right? Playful shape shifter, constantly expressing his own passions and sexuality. He was very androgynous in his beauty, in that his Venusian Venus in Taurus was very strong, in that he wore makeup, he always wore beautiful clothes, he was very feminine in affect, equal to his femininity, symbolized by the by his Venus in Taurus, is his strong Mars in Aries, his powerful, raw sexuality. And so that point, again, for anybody in the horoscope, Venus-Mars, the midpoint is, as I said, it is a point of symbolic of internal passion, or the marriage, if you will, of the masculine and feminine forces within. But again, he had this connected to Gemini, which is always, he's expressing it, he's thinking about it, Mercury. Eppertine says about this point, thinking is influenced by the love impulse, actors and writers of love stories. And it was known, Prince had a huge vocabulary, long history, many eclectic styles and genres. But overall, he was concerned, he was interested in love and romance and sexuality. He was, as they say in one of his biographers, he was not a fighter, he was a lover. So he had this interesting androgynous quality, which I think, in part, I think he was a very strong forefront. He was on the forefront of some of the androgynous, shape-shifting, gender-bending, and also tantric sexuality practices that are really quite in the milieu today. But I feel like he was a real early on demonstrated that. Okay, Tony, is that clear?
That was great. Thank you. Yeah,
Okay.
that was even more than I was thinking of. I was just thinking of specifically how to understand that notation, just in a technical way, like what does that mean?
Oh.
Venus / Mars equals Mercury. But you said the long version, so that was beautiful. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, couldn't find the glyphs, so I wrote my own glyphs, but that is the way it's written. There's Venus / Mars, which indicates the Venus-Mars midpoint, equals Mercury. So thanks, Tony.
Sure thing. Yeah, that was great.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting that I'm just thinking about the ways in which I also don't think that we don't see artists like this today in the same way. I think that time period in the 80s was really interesting as well for that kind of gender bending performance and how it was received and that I think the ground that it paved for other people, so that now it's kind of normalized and not as unique maybe.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that more a little bit with the transits to his Scorpio ascendant, but yes. And again, I just think that picture is shows his to my eye, his androgynous, both masculine and feminine beauty. So moving on. Okay, now I'm going to look at some of the biographical markers, or some of the key events in his horoscope. Again, with that basic background or backdrop of his natal chart, looking at his biography and what happened in his life. The first thing, in 1963, Neptune, transiting Neptune, came to the ascendant. So the natal chart is in here, and here are the transits. Now, what's interesting, this occurred, Neptune came to the ascendant when he was 5 and 6 years old. And he wrote his first song on the piano when he was 7. So early in his life, we could say symbolically that the muse, the artistic muse, signified by Neptune at it in one of its finer or more creative manifestations, the muse of music absolutely enveloped his being, his consciousness. We know as astrologers certainly that when an outer planet, or when any planet crosses the ascendant in the course of the life, that has a marked impact. But the earlier the impact, the earlier in the biography, the younger the child, the more deeply embedded it is in the psyche. So again, when he was 5, 6, and at that point in his biography, he did have a so-called troubled childhood, in that I think the parents split up when he was 3 and they were divorced when he was 10. But early on, there was a lot of chaos. I'm not going to speculate on that, but chaos in his personal life. But he said that he was drawn to music. He took refuge in music. And again, he wrote his first song when he was 7. After that, in my mind, that infusion, shall we say, of the muse, or a strengthening of his innate musicianship, or his innate call to artistry, was profoundly strengthened at a very early age for him. At the same time, as I said, corresponded with difficulties in the home life. So the next big event I want to mention, and this goes, Tony, to what we were talking about the eroticism of the era. In 1978, Prince was 20. Uranus came to the ascendant. Here's the ascendant, 16. Uranus came. Interestingly enough, this Uranus came precisely to that degree only once. I mean, astrologers will note that planets most often sort of hover around a certain point. There's 3 passages, so to speak. But it's striking symbolically to me that this Uranus got to the exact degree of his ascendant only once, in November of 1978. And also symbolically, the fact that the sun was right there. That's striking to me as what a personal, how he very personally embodied or was captured by the erotic impulse, shall we say, of the age. So Uranus in Scorpio, the unleashing of a profound eroticism. He wrote during this period, the next, probably for 10 years, he wrote his most erotic and challenging songs. As I mentioned here, his first album, in terms of his exceptional creativity and musical prowess, his first album was produced at this time in 1978. He wrote, produced, arranged, composed all the songs, and played all the 27 instruments on that record. So
what a way to come out.
Yes.
Just do the whole thing.
Yes.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So, and let's see. Yeah. So I'm here just looking, I'm looking a year later. Again, we see that he's just had that awakening, shall we say, of the unleashing of extreme eroticism. I keep repeating that phrase. I don't know how else to encapsulate it. So, but that occurred in 78. And then in 79, I'm bringing a few different techniques here. As we've noted already, there was his midheaven degree is 29 Leo, the famous degree. We all know we're still in the portal, if you will, of the total solar eclipse at 29 Leo of last week. But in his biography in 1979, there was a solar eclipse at 29 Leo in August of 1979. So in August, that midheaven degree, that powerful projection into his career, there was an eclipse at that degree. And then later, which is what I'm showing in this chart, on September 28th, transiting Jupiter. Jupiter came to that degree, 29 Leo. Jupiter rules the second house of money, shall we say, for this purpose, and the fifth house of creativity. So his creativity, his income, Jupiter magnifying, coming right after the eclipse, Jupiter then triggering or amplifying that powerful midheaven, the powerful degree, 29 Leo. So one story, let me read this quote, and then I want to give an anecdote here that's interesting. This is from an interview in 2015, but yeah, it just encapsulates a lot of what I'm trying to get to here in better language. But the quote, few artists in history have had musical sex issues on quite the scale that Prince did. Incest, references to rape, a queasy description of his first sexual partner's vagina. Before becoming a Jehovah's Witness, Prince once considered this all fair game. So that is from an article in the Guardian newspaper. So Prince once considered this all fair game. So in this period of time, in 1979, exactly when he was at this very visible peak, Tipper Gore, some of you guys may remember, but Tipper Gore brought home one of Prince's records to her daughter, and she listened to the song "Darling Nikki," and she was very shocked. It's about masturbation. It's very graphically sexual. So she started a movement to have, and it became some sort of board that to warn parents about explicit dialogue on the records. So explicit dialogue would be a warrant to protect the children. And his song, that song, Darling Nikki, was considered in those days one of the 10 nastiest songs ever written. But again, highly overtly sexual. But the interesting thing here too, to me, which speaks to lots of levels of Prince and his place in history, there's a technique, I guess, in the musical industry called backmasking, which I really never thought was real, but because I was a young woman when this happened. I thought Tipper Gore, I thought they were all kind of overreacting, whatever. But backmasking is a method that apparently Prince employed, and apparently many musicians employ, where if you play the record backwards, there's another message, a subliminal message, this hidden message. And the fear was, and perhaps it was apparent, but the fear was that the messages were urging people to devote their souls to Satan, etc., to go down the black path. But interestingly, in Prince's song, Darling Nikki, the mirror message, they call it the mirror message in Darling Nikki actually features Prince announcing his happiness at the thought of Christ's future resurrection. And his biographer, Matt Thorne, quotes, "Whenever there is darkness in Prince's work, light is rarely far away." The images of dawn and resurrection and spiritual and religious rebirth were themes in his consistently throughout his career. Okay, everybody's still with me?
Yeah, and we're right about that halfway point that you asked me to tell you about.
Okay, I
So
will move
great.
along then. Thank you.
And Catherine said, this is fascinating, Mary, and she's been making some great comments as well.
Oh, nice. Thank you. It's nice to hear. I can't. Okay, so I'm going to move along. This, again, to me is a picture, right? A beautiful, quite a. If you didn't know Prince, if you didn't follow him in those years, this is a very clear picture of how he dressed, how he looked, and this beautiful quote. I will read this, but it captures him as well. This is from his obituary. "The impossible gymnastic virtuosity of mind, soul, and genitals. Prince was a man bursting with music, a wildly prolific songwriter, a virtuoso on guitars, keyboards, and drums, and a master architect of funk, rock, R&B, and pop, even as his music defied genres." Okay, I'm going to move on to the next big chapter or event in his life in 1984. Well, again, this is a sketch. These are highlights of his life. But in 1984, Purple Rain, the movie, opened. He won an Academy Award for the best song score. It was the first time ever that an artist had a #1 album, a single, and a film all #1 in the charts. It was 24 weeks on the charts, etc. It has been named probably even higher now, is my guess, since his passing. But at the time, it was ranked by Rolling Stone as 72nd on the list of the 500 best albums of all time. So this is Prince's absolute moment of worldwide visibility. And I'm going to look at a few layers, but the first thing I'm going to want to note here is the transits of the opening, July 27th, 84. Just a few things. Transiting Mercury was in Virgo at the midheaven, just past that midheaven point, but at the very top of the chart, Mercury. And then significantly also the nodal axis, there's the north node of the moon in Gemini, also traveling on his Mercury. So the transiting node was picking up Mercury, and the transiting Mercury was picking up his midheaven. I want to look at his progress chart at the event of when the movie opened to it became a phenomenon. In his progress chart, the progressed ascendant had come to 4 degrees of Sagittarius, which was opposite his natal Mercury. So again, that Mercury, natal Mercury, was brought forward, was strengthened. The progressed ascendant had come opposite natal Mercury. Also, yeah, I think that's what I said. Let me see. What else did I want to say about that? I'm not realizing I have to. Yeah. If I go back one slide. So the transits, bear with me here. The transits, the time that the movie opened, the north node was on Mercury, as I've just said. But also then the progressed ascendant was also picked up the transiting nodes. I don't want to get too waylaid by technical description, but just noting the exactitude of these transits and progressions. Another feature of his life that year when he exploded, shall we say, on the world scene, There were 2 lunar eclipses in 1984, both making exact aspects to Prince's natal chart. On June 13th, there was a lunar eclipse right on his Saturn, 22 Sag. And then there was a lunar eclipse in November right on his midheaven, his ascendant, descendant. So his projection into the world and the people around him, 16 degrees of Scorpio, 16 degrees of Taurus. So 2 lunar eclipses, both on precise. This is, the first one was on the Saturn planet, and the next one was on his horizontal axis. One thing I'll just note here that's interesting about this, the first eclipse in June, the Saturn rules his 4th in the natal, and the score for this music, he wrote the music for the movie, and apparently, and the movie itself was apparently quite autobiographical in ways that he apparently never quite was as direct or as never quite as direct or revealing about his personal process. And I was thinking about that in terms of the eclipse on the ruler of the 4th, the parental axis, and the desire to heal the wound. So perhaps, again, I'm projecting, but some demonstration of his desire to integrate or heal the wound symbolically through the family of origin. But interesting that, as I said, that was known as a very unusually biographical for him piece of work. Okay, here's just a pause to look at some of the gorgeous outfits that he wore on stage. And Prince apparently always looked beautiful. I mean, even well dressed. I guess his taste is in the eye of the beholder, but he was always concerned with fashion. And apparently when people around him, his entourage, the hairdressers, the many people he supported, he always had them look well dressed, be presentable. He was very interested and aware of fashion and presentation. Okay, moving quickly through this one. The next big event I want to talk about is in 1993. Astrologers will recollect that we had this Uranus-Neptune conjunction in the sky. Uranus-Neptune in Capricorn, which was a generational marker that we could say simply broke down business models, ways of doing business. Capricorn were being revolutionized, radicalized, tremendous upheaval in all matters concerned with Capricorn. And for this purpose, I'm thinking business models, right? So anyway, this occurred, 19 degrees was, to move myself out of the way here, Tony, was 19, was square his natal Jupiter. There's Jupiter at 21. There's a conjunction at 19. So square is natal Jupiter. Again, Jupiter rules in his chart the 2nd house of income and the 5th house of creativity. This is when he left his record label. For those who know anything about his biography, he left his record label. He painted slave on his face, and he was not able to use his name, Prince, because it was still under contract. It was a legal dispute. But he really eventually gained enormous respect for being a pioneer in artists owning rights to their own work. So definitely this Neptune-Uranus, radical new business model. He was on the forefront of that. And this is the symbol many have seen. Obviously, he couldn't use his name, but he designed this symbol. Okay, moving ahead to another significant period in his life, 1996. So again, here's the natal chart inside, and outside is the solar eclipse. Pardon me. October 12th, 1996, there was a solar eclipse Here we have it up here at 19 degrees of Libra. 19 Libra, October 12th. 19, here's his Jupiter at 22. This I consider a conjunction. The eclipse was on top, conjunct his natal Jupiter. Jupiter in the birth chart, again, rules the 5th, the house of children. It's placed in the 12th. Children, perhaps something sorrowful, 12th house. His two children died this year. I'm going to look at that more in a moment, but just that symbolism alone is so eerie and evocative to me. Yeah, the ruler of the 5th, the children in the 12th, can be considered a house of sorrow or of loss, and the eclipse triggered that. Another point that I want to note here is that transiting Saturn at the time of the eclipse, transiting Saturn here at 2 degrees of Aries. So the time of the eclipse, transiting Saturn was conjunct his Mars at the ruler of his chart, 0 Aries. The reason this is particularly significant is because, or gives more weight, more influence, is because transiting Saturn had stopped in the sky at 0 degrees of Aries on April 11th. So earlier that year, Saturn stationed on his Mars at 0 Aries. Again, it's placing emphasis on the ruler of the chart, Mars. In this Porphyry system that I'm looking at here, that is placed in the 5th, which is creativity and his children. I'm not going to get into trying to integrate whole signs right now, but I'm sticking with Porphyry because I think most people were familiar with looking at quadrant house systems. So let's just say for now.
Actually, we do use both here, or we've had, I should rephrase that. We have astrologers from a variety of backgrounds, so people have been exposed to whole sign houses and Placidus and quadrant house systems. So feel free to bring that in if you like, Mary. Not to derail you, but Catherine had a great comment that symbol incorporates Venus, Mars, and Mercury glyphs, and she just pointed out that it correlates with the Venus, Mars, Mercury midpoint thing that you pointed out.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
She says, I'm starting to think Prince might have had some astrological notions.
He was thank you for bringing that up, Catherine, because yes, the symbol, he was eclectic. He was interested, he researched, he was a consumer of knowledge, of metaphysics. He was interested in many, many, many kinds of things that we probably will know more about as his, more writing, but he was very private most of the time in his life, but definitely. And the use of, the esoteric or hidden imagery behind the symbol. Yes, this is definitely, thank you for noticing that. Okay, then, again, I just want to mention this because it is a very pivotal year of his life, 96. And so to encapsulate, there was the solar eclipse on Jupiter, and then Mars, Saturn stationing on Mars. Again, when a planet stations forward or back, it's staying in one place a long time. It has a bigger impact, a deeper, longer impact in the horoscope. Okay, so 4 days later, October 16th, his son was born. Emir. Emir means, it's Arabic for prince. This child only lived for under a week. He was born with a very significant birth defect. So first of all, we set the stage. The eclipse has just come to his Jupiter, ruling the house of children, in the 5th of sorrows. And again, that's, as I said, that's Saturn. Saturn sitting on top, emphasizing Mars, natal Mars in the 5th. So the child, again, tragically, very severe birth defects and only never made it out of the hospital. It was very, very sad, tragic story. So one thing I wanted to bring up here too, I'm noting that Mars, his ruler, at the birth of his son, Mars was at 22 Leo, exactly opposite his Chiron at 22 Aquarius. So, and in the natal chart, so let me show you this. In the natal chart, Venus and Chiron. So the Venus, Chiron midpoint, Mars is right on that. That's what I'm seeing here. Venus, Chiron equals Mars. So that's a little bit more of a graphic demonstration of the midpoints. So the midpoint, the meeting place of Venus, geometrically, numerically, the middle point between Venus and Chiron. I look at all kinds of things when working with clients, and to me, this is just such a notable demonstration of, okay, this is what happened in his life, what was going on in the sky, and the ruling planet strongly connected to Chiron, which for this purpose, we can think about as a sorrowful, painful situation. There are many, many layers of interpretation to Chiron, but in looking at his story and the fact Venus, Chiron, so equals Mars, that was so the sorrowfulness, there's a sad event, a very sad event, shall we say. Now, and this also just sort of broke my heart when I looked at this. This is his progressed chart for when his son died. So again, the progressions relate, I think of them as relating to the internal unfolding, more subjective, more internal, the organic process within the soul development. Sometimes, obviously, a progression has strong parallels in the outer life, but it also is primarily a significator in my mind of the deeper layers of one's being. And so when his son died, he was in a progressed balsamic moon in Cancer. So to shorten this, the balsamic moon is the end. It's the very end of a cycle. It's connected with letting go, sometimes with sorrows. Demetra's famous description of getting comfortable with the dark, with the unknown, but certainly this theme of letting go. And obviously in the sign of Cancer, this was by all, as much as we know, this was the first child he had fathered. He's longing to start a family. He spoke a lot about his happy marriage and wanting to have a big family, have many children. So his wife said, I don't think he ever got over it. Another point in this progressed chart that's notable, again, Mars is the ruler. So in the progressed chart, Mars was on the south node. Again, an indication of a south node event, of a loss or a sorrow. Again, just as a description of this event, not in any way as a definitive interpretation of Mars with the south node, but the ruling planet in the progressed chart comes to the south node. So the feeling again of, as his wife said, I don't think he ever got over it, the sense of a grievous loss. Okay, then a few lovely, I love this picture. To me, that really shows the Gemini, the flirtatiousness, the quirkiness. Another quote, I love the picture, I really like that it sort of captures him. This was written before he passed away. This was a contemporary description encouraging people to see his last concert. And the writer said, if you like music, art, theater, sex, spirituality, literature, love, humor, philosophy, or culture, you should see Prince in concert. So let me move on to the last year of his life. Tony, I have a few more minutes, right?
Yep. Yeah, you have plenty of time.
Okay.
Got a good 20 minutes left.
Okay. Okay. So here's where I'm going to, in this talk for the first time, talk about the perfections, perfected year. And let me just say that this is a wonderful technique. It would be, I'd love to do a whole study on Prince's life by perfections. So this is just one marker. This is one notable display of how to use perfections. And basically, you know, probably if people don't know what this means, I can definitely encourage you to track down Chris Brennan and his wonderful work, his book, and his many video YouTube presentations that explain this technique. It's really quite simple to use, and basically there's, for each year of life, we move around the horoscope. So every 12 years, we sort of start again and move around. So Prince, on his birthday in 2015, turned 57. So for everybody, the 57th year is a 10th house year. So we know from this technique, it's a 10th house year. He has Leo on the 10th. So the sun, the ruler of the 10th, becomes a very powerful planet, a significating planet for that year. So that's the first thing we can observe here, that this is a sun year for him. It's a 10th house year. We could maybe think of this as a certain professional peak, or where his visibility, he was always obviously a very famous person, but we can think of this as a fulfillment or a culmination in some way, and it's connected to the significations of the 10th house in general. And then, as I said, more specifically, in this case, it's a sun year. The sun rules Leo. So a little bit of back story here. There were two eclipses. Okay, so Prince passed away in April of 2016. So he's in a 10th house perfected year when he passed away, because he didn't live to his next birthday in June of 2016. He would have entered an 11th house year. He didn't get that far. He died in his 10th house sun year. So what else was going on? As I said, we know the sun, because it rules the 10th, is going to be key. So in March of 2016, in March of 2016, there were two solar eclipses that impacted his chart. The first was a total solar eclipse at almost 19 degrees of Pisces. The fact that it's a total eclipse and square to the sun, which is the perfected Lord of the year, the Lord of the year is the sun, is very significant. Sometimes I might not give that much, it's a little over 2 degrees. It's close by degree, but certainly it's even more significant. The implications of that eclipse are even more significant because, first of all, it's a total solar eclipse, and again, because his sun is the key planet for the year for him. So there was, again, two eclipses in March. The second one, March 23rd, was a little wider in orb, but it was a lunar eclipse at 3 degrees of Libra Aries, and so that was on his Mars, right? So he had a solar eclipse on his sun and a lunar eclipse on picking up his natal Mars, the ruler of the chart. Then another key feature in this month, this was a very strong month for him, stressful, you could say. In March, soon after this eclipse, Saturn stationed on March 25th at 16 degrees 24 Sag. 16 degrees 24 Sag. Here's his sun at 16. 40. So Saturn stationed precisely opposite to his sun. I think we could say generally that, yeah, the vitality, the life force signified by the sun is weighed down by Saturn, the weight of Saturn, and possibly we could say, compromised by the eclipse on the sun. So the life force is vulnerable. Okay, now here's the time of his passing, April 21st, 2016. Okay, forgive me, I'm going to go back, Mercury retrograde. I want to mention one other thing about this, the setup. This is the month before he died, basically. And that regarding this Saturn station opposing the sun, a close friend of his also died in this spring. She actually died in February. Her name was Vanity, and she was his age peer. She was a love affair. She was key in his early musical career. She was very musically involved with him, professionally, romantically, etc. But she also, as I said, she was his age peer. She was born with Saturn and Sag. Many of his romances, love affairs, and there were many, that were with younger women. And as he got older, the women sometimes were younger. But Vanity, her name was Denise. I can't quite recollect her formal name, but Vanity was a name that Prince named her. He started a band for her, etc. You may know the story, but the gist of it here, from my purpose, is that she was a deep old friend, his age peer, and some commentary after he passed away. Who knows if this is really true, but someone commented that Vanity, some people thought, was really the love of his life. I don't know if we can really say that, but astrologically, we don't know that, but I think astrologically, the fact that Prince was under these conditions, astrologically under these conditions, and particularly with that Saturn stationing, I think the depression or being worn out, etc., and the loss of his age peer, because Saturn, if nothing else, right? Saturn does give us an awareness of the passage of time, and we have a unique connection with those who are in our same age group. So I just wanted to mention that as I believe another factor in Prince's last days, astrological factor anyway, and note in his biography. Okay, so here we have the transits at the time of his passing. The coroner estimated about 3 a.m. April 21st. So first of all, there's the sun, there's the moon. There was a full moon the following day, so the full moon was approaching. So again, we know it's a solar year for him because we're still in the perfected 10th house year. So the sun, transiting sun, was just past his south node. We're on his south node. Again, south node, to keep it simple for this purpose, can be a point of energy loss or of drain. The nodes are often, they have complex meanings, but certainly this sense of destiny crossing or meeting one's destiny. We know that the nodes have to do with where the eclipses fall. So this sort of precipitation of destined moments, if you will, can be connected to the nodes. So here was the sun, again, the transmitter of light. That day, the day he passed away, was on his south node. And the moon, this is purely speculative and symbolic thinking, actually, as is everything I'm doing today. But given the coroner's estimated time of death places the transiting moon right on Jupiter in the 12th. which is so beautiful in that one can hope. Moon with Jupiter, that he had a graceful, easeful passage. Jupiter is often transiting, or natal Jupiter is often connected to at the moment of death. But more significant, or symbolically also, which is poignant about this, is that he died alone. His body was found in the elevator, so we could think of that as an enclosed space, a 12th house enclosed, and he was alone. So I think that's a strong picture there. And as I said, I always hope and pray that he had a easeful and gracious passage, although we certainly know the story of his life may suggest otherwise, but from a purely symbolic point of view and pure energetic view. One other thing I'm going to note here, again, we know about the nodes. I've used the Porphyry house system here, and something that I've noticed it, I've worked with it a lot. I have not done an extensive research project on it, and I've actually tried to, but one thing I've noticed is the Porphyry house cusps. Porphyry house cusps tend to show up at the moment of death. By that I mean show up by either the Porphyry 8th house cusp is sensitive and often triggered either by transit or progression or lunation. Lots of different ways that I've seen that 8th house cusp triggered at the time of passing. So I'll just note here, and again, that's that's an observation that I work with. It's not a rule, but again, in my design here of observing the life and seeing what astrology was apparent during these events, these few significant events in his life. The transiting nodes when he passed, the South Node was at 21 Gemini, North Node was at 21 Virgo, right? So the transiting nodes were square the 8th house cusp when he passed. Okay, now his progress chart for this year, the year he passed. This is the day he passed. Here's the moon, progress moon at 10 Aries, progress sun at 10 Leo, closely conjunct, or still applying, but quite close to progressed Uranus. So sun Uranus in the progress chart in Leo, moon in Aries. So first of all, the moon progress moon traveling through the 5th in Aries, applying to a trine, applying very tightly to perfect the trine. This last year of his life, he was on, for the first time in his life, he did a solo tour, the piano and microphone tour. It was the first time it was just Prince and the microphone and the piano. As I said, the first time in a long, illustrious career. Certainly to me, that's a beautiful evocation of the moon in Aries. And I would like to think that his last year, this tour with the progressed moon coming to trine that sun, was a creatively satisfying period for him. Again, the strong, again, after a 40-year or 35-year life in touring, public life, thousands of concerts all over the world, that the solo tour he did right before he passed for the first time with that moon in Aries. Yes. Okay, so this is the poster, and this is what Prince said in the beginning as he introduced one of his solo sets in that last tour. This is January 2016. The tour began in January. And he said, "Welcome to the new story. We need a new one because the old one doesn't work anymore." Which I think is a beautiful, hopeful statement. And I also do tie it to, perhaps symbolically, to in the progress chart, the sun with Uranus. The visionary, we need a new story. The old one doesn't work. Come, welcome to the new story. Okay, here's just a little encapsulation of some of the results, if you will, the business or whatever, the outside results of his life. And 100 million albums sold worldwide. That has gone up exponentially since his passing. The sound engineer whose podcast I listened to, he was so eloquent, and it was a wonderful, long conversation from someone who tracked the technical, shall we say, side of Prince's artistry and supported his live work for, as I said, on and off, but consistent, but for 27 years. He said that, and this wouldn't be hard to verify, but he said that Prince's music sales went up something like 2,000% after he passed. So these numbers were accurate when he died. And
Mary Catherine's asking if you know the name of the sound engineer.
Yes, it's Scotty Baldwin. Yeah, for anybody who's interested, is a fanatic, there's a cool Prince podcast, and he was interviewed on that. Yeah, Scotty Baldwin. So here's a quote I wanted to also read, because again, part of my, I was so delighted and continue to be delighted and impressed and moved by Prince's musicality, by his musical genius. And from the same interview that I quoted earlier in The Guardian in November 2015, and this was a live, rare interview with Prince. So he spoke to this journalist in November 2015, and the journalist says, "Prince is, by common consent, the one bona fide, no further questions, musical genius that 80s pop produced. A man who can play pretty much any instrument he chooses, possessed of a remarkable voice that can still leap effortlessly from baritone to falsetto." And that was something, the voice, the range in his voice was something also that I found particularly beautiful, fascinating. He was a very unique person. Okay, so getting into this moment here, a little bit in real time here. You may recognize this gentleman, Van Jones. He's a television commentator. He was also in the Obama White House. He was a close friend of Prince's. And after the day after Prince died, he was very emotional on CNN. And this is what he said: "There was a core of genius that he used music to express himself, but he was also an incredible humanitarian. He was a Jehovah's Witness and wasn't allowed to speak publicly about all of his good acts, any of his charitable acts. Anybody struggling anywhere in the world, he was sending checks, he was making phone calls, but he did not want it to be known publicly. He did not want us to say it. But I'm going to say it because the world needs to know that it wasn't just the music. The music was one way he tried to help the world, but he was helping every single day of his life." I think a quite beautiful testament. And this also was very moving to me when I saw this, and became, again, this was another point of my real intrigue with Prince. In a further interview, somebody asked him, "How did you meet Prince?" And he said, "Well, Prince saw me on television." Prince, as a Gemini, and again, he was an avid, he was an avid culture and media connoisseur. So, or followed media, followed the news. as we could say, simply for his Gemini sun and Mercury. However, my point here, I'm winding back to Van Jones when asked, how did you meet Prince? Because he was so obviously moved when he passed and on television and just very emotional. He obviously had, to my eye, had a strong personal connection with him. So later on, again, an interviewer asked, well, how did you meet Prince? And Van Jones said, well, I was on television. I was talking about one of his projects. Van Jones is a strong advocate of environmental causes, of having young African Americans have access to technology. He has many different, letting African Americans have access to programming skills, etc. He's a big outfit called Yes We Code, for instance. So Prince, he said, Prince saw him on television talking about his advocacy for certain groups. And he said Prince would send him checks. He would get these checks, anonymous checks in the mail. And Van Jones, I think he said, I couldn't cash them. I just wasn't sure where it was coming from, so he didn't cash them. And then one day, a representative of Prince apparently called and said, listen, please, the donor wishes to remain anonymous, but please go ahead and cash those checks. And Van said, well, what can you tell me about the guy? And the party on the phone said, well, his favorite color is purple. So Van then laughed and said, well, at that point, I wasn't going to cash the check. I was going to put it on the wall. But it was a lovely little anecdote. And again, I want to wrap up in a moment this idea about where does the purple come from. But yeah, I'll just move past this. And this is a quote from Prince towards the end of his life. And remember, if you can recollect, he did die with the full moon on his Neptune North Node. And he had the Pisces moon. I mean, we can recognize a deeply sensitive, empathic being. He said, I don't need any more attention, but I can't be in this world and see this much pain and suffering and not do something. And may you live to see the dawn. These are pictures from a tribute 1 year after. When 1 year after Prince passed, Spike Lee in Brooklyn had a big party, big celebration, and these pictures are from. But may you live to see the dawn. I'll just note here that we're so used now to writing in numerical, because we text and we make shorthand. But Prince, in terms of his Gemini eclectic nature, he was writing in that with that notation way back. I don't know if it will be historically accurate to say he was the first or invented it, but clearly he used language in a unique way. And yes, again, from Spike's beautiful party tribute to Prince, the year on the anniversary of his death, or his birthday. It was a birthday after he died. I'll just leave you with this quote, famous, of course, beginning of one of Prince's famous songs. But yeah, just in testament or honor, my desire to kind of honor his memory, I'll just leave us with this beautiful quote. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called life.
Thanks, Mary. That was really great. I'm just, struck by how strong that Pisces moon comes through so much of what you said, especially here towards the end. And I was thinking about that Van Jones quote after he passed away as well, in conjunction with the Pisces moon being on the IC, the darkest part of the chart, and the Scorpio rising, square the Scorpio rising, and how it's reinforcing that that there is something, generous and compassionate and kind about his nature that he totally kept hidden, that maybe he, you would see most if you were really close, if you were part of his family. And that symbol of the family was really common throughout his work. He even had a side project that he called The Family. So super interesting. Catherine had an earlier question that I thought you could just, maybe if you could just tell folks a few more words about what profections are, just describing it as a timing technique.
Okay, yes, it's as Tony just said, it's a timing technique, a Hellenistic timing technique, or used for predictive work, or again, just to understand where we are in time. And it is based on it's based on the horoscope, the 12 houses of the horoscope, and each house, we move around the 12 houses in 12 years. So we stay, there's a time lord. This is a time lord technique. So the house that we are in, which is relative to our age, that house at that age, and that's consistent with all of us. As I said, for all of us, the 57th year is a 10th house year, etc. The planet that's on the cusp of that house for us personally is the time lord, is the technical lingo for is the planet that is the time lord for that year, which, as I tried to demonstrate here, there are lots of more specific ways of using it, but just I feel like the way I just showed this at the end of his life, that it was in a 10th house or a sun year, and the various ways that the sun was challenged, shall we say, with the eclipse, etc., in the last year of his life. So does that help?
That helps. That was perfect. Thanks, Mary. We also had a student who hadn't heard someone using the traditional ruler for Scorpio before, so I just explained that a little bit about that. But maybe you can just tell folks if you use just the traditional rulers. Do you do traditional and modern, or what's your approach there?
Yes, thank you. I always look at the traditional rulers first. I always do, and then I personally don't include the modern rulers. As I showed in this presentation, I look at the transits of the Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. I look at those as bringing significations of events and times in the life, but I personally don't consider, I always, for instance, look to Jupiter as ruling Pisces, to Saturn as ruling Capricorn and Aquarius, and Mars as ruling Scorpio. And a lot of sort of different ways I do that, or reasons. One thing I'll mention here that may be useful to people, early on in my studies, I studied with Zoltan Mason, an astrologer in New York, and one thing he said, which kind of stuck with me, is look to when you're trying to understand the life, look to the old ruler first, and so in this case, look to Mars, consider Mars first and all of its implications and its meanings. And he described it as the higher ruler, the higher octave ruler, basically, it doesn't have a chance unless or until that primary old ruler is well established and in good condition, so to speak. So that's just an image I have that stayed with me. But in practical use, I definitely stick with the old rulers. Another reason for that is that they move much more quickly. When you're practicing astrologer, Mars transits and Jupiter moves more quickly. It's more useful to as a timing method.
Thanks, Mary. And we just have time for one more. So Catherine had a comment. She said at the beginning of the webinar, you mentioned a symbolic moment that you experienced when you heard Prince died, and wondered if you'd be willing to share that.
Well, that's so sweet. Yes, I will. Thank you, Catherine. Yes, as I said, I was not a Prince fan. I am a music lover, and I was also in a particularly, shall we say, sensitive period in my own life. And I have to reveal here that I am a sun in Pisces. But so I was particularly, shall we say, impressionable at that time. But what happened was that in front of my house, the night Prince passed, there was a beautiful giant rainbow, the double rainbow. Now that's not unusual for where I live, but the whole sequence of events for me, and that this magical rainbow appeared. And then I think I heard later that in Paisley Park, where Prince lived and died, there was a rainbow. So it was just that kind of magical moment for me.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And thanks for sharing everything, Mary. It's just really great to see somebody who's had so many years practicing astrology, working with charts, share their wisdom, because as folks, as you can see, most astrologers do use a variety of techniques, and you got to kind of see how Mary pulls from different techniques and incorporates them in a chart reading. So I hope you learned a lot from that. I know I did. And thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for your great comments and questions. Lauren Rose says, merci beaucoup, it was fantastic. Judy says, awesome. And Catherine says, beautiful, thanks for sharing. Brilliant intelligence. And Mary says, Judy. And Catherine says, this was a very, very interesting webinar. I've learned so much, thank you. So thanks. We always appreciate the positive feedback, folks.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I need to say one more thing.
Of course.
Get back to it. The whole purple.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Beginning, I was also mesmerized. Why are they all wearing purple? But I give a deep nod and shout out to my friend, the wonderful astrologer Kate Petty, who within those early days, those first few days after Prince passed, she brought up a reference that Vettius Valens made, 2nd century astrologer, and he connected Venus to the color purple.
Oh, that's interesting. I was just assuming it was, it's thought of as a royal color, and Regulus on the MC and royalty and his name and all that, but yes. Yeah, that's an interesting addition.
I thought that, yeah, the Venus, and again, that powerful Venus in Taurus, right, that he has. So I just wanted to acknowledge Miss Kate Petty for that beautiful, help me understand the purple. Help me understand the purple.
Thank you. And Catherine says it's also the color of dreams. And I think that's a beautiful image to leave it on.
Yeah, okay.
So thanks everybody for being here. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Please check out our calendar for upcoming events. I believe our next one is with me. I think we'll be doing a webinar on challenging Mars. Then we have a webinar coming up with Stephen Forrest, and Stephen's gonna be talking about the North Node. And then I believe the next one after that is with Frank Clifford on the MC and career signification. So really look forward to all of those. And thanks again for being here, everybody. And we will see you next time.